the Executive Director of the Family Business Center of Loyola University Chicago, and we'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, The Nuts and Bolts of Family Meetings. Before we get started, I want to have a few quick announcements. Number one, on your right-hand side of your screen, you should see a dialog box that allows you the opportunity to ask questions. Through chat, you can type a message in the dialog box and send that to us. We will gather the questions and answer the questions and ask those of our panelists from Dawn Foods at the end of the webinar. And another note we'd like to make is that given the nature of our families sharing stories with each other, we want to remind everybody that the confidentiality policy that we operate using during our normal in-face seminars applies here too, so please treat this as a confidential webinar in sharing the information. Finally, if there's anything from this session that you want to go deeper on as a family, you should feel free to call us at the Family Business Center and we can help you go deeper on any of the topics that we're going to be talking about today. Next slide, please. We have two great speakers with us from one of our member families, Dawn Food Products. Joni Jones, who's a third-generation in-law, and Sarah Richmond, who's the president of the Dawn Foods Foundation. They will be sharing the story of how they've embarked on the process of family meetings over the past few years and shared some of their trials and tribulations, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of interesting nuggets for you to learn from their story. Next slide, please. So today we're going to talk about, what is the purpose, what's the core purpose of family meetings, how do we think about participation, who should be in the meetings, how to structure and manage the content for the meeting, how to think about who should lead a family meeting, and then we'll talk a little bit about Dawn Foods and hear a real-life story about all of those things. Next slide, please. So a family meeting is really to provide a regular venue for communication. One of the things that happens in family businesses is we think we're just supposed to inherently communicate with each other because we're family. We're supposed to know what each other's thinking, and we assume that we're always on the same page. But as we all know, that's often not the case. So having a regular venue for communication between family members and having the goal of building family unity and cohesion is critical to the long-term success of the family business. Over time, we can build this common sense of purpose and connection and a sense of common goals and objectives for both the family and the business, which will sustain us across time. Family cohesion, as you've heard me say many a time, is a family's greatest strategic advantage, but it takes work. It's not something we can just inherently expect to be there. We have to create the context, especially when you're moving from siblings to cousins and beyond. Siblings have a level of commonality with each other because they grew up together. Cousins often are growing up across the country, sometimes across the world, and creating that sense of commonality, that common sense of purpose and common goals is often a very large challenge for those individuals to create that sense of connection. Next slide, please. If you've come to any of our seminars recently, you've seen this slide, but it's basically talking about the four components of cohesion that we have to build, which family meetings are a core component of. We need to build basic attachment between each other as family members. We need to build a sense of pride, identity, and connection around the business and a sense of pride in the business. And then we have to have both business financial success and understand the financial needs of family members. The conversations for all four of these areas is handled in a family meeting, can be handled in a family meeting. So when you're thinking about content creation, think about what content and what conversations do we need to have to build these four dimensions of cohesion. Next slide. So our goals are building trust, avoiding the resentment of interruption. I think we've all had the experience in our family dinners and Thanksgiving and the holidays where business conversations have interrupted family conversations. We want to improve communication, allow for coordination of initiatives, make sure family members are all rowing in the same direction. And probably the most important thing, which is enabling a clarity of expectations and roles. A lot of times the unspoken expectations that we have as family members confuse us because we're not talking about it and creating common expectations so that we all know what's fair. I think the research shows that as long as people feel like the expectations are clear and the process for creating those expectations was clear and fair, they're willing to move forward with decisions that may not meet their personal desires or goals, but they believe that are in the best interest of the whole family and the whole business. So family meetings can also provide insurance for crisis communication and the opportunity to practice communicating before a crisis happens, as well as encouraging thoughtful decision making. So one of the questions, next slide please, one of the questions that we often get is who should participate in a family business? So in thinking about this, we have to think about the concept of trust. In a family meeting, we want to create an environment of trust where people can speak their minds. They won't be attacked, judged, that we can have real conversations about where people are. So we have to think about that in relation to who should be in the room. So the ideal is certainly to have all family members, including in-laws, casting the net as broadly as possible. Anybody who, anybody in the family that impacts the growth and development of the next generation should have a certain role in the context of family meetings. But the reality is not every family is ready to do that right off the bat. So we need to think about starting with what's a core group of people we can engage in meaningful conversations and build an environment of trust. And then as we feel appropriate, then broadening the circle there. So if there's a lot of controversy around in-laws and a lot of trials and tribulations, we don't think we can have a productive family meeting, we may want to start with just the blood family members and work our way towards incorporating in-laws in a fashion that will create an environment of trust. But in general, the more people we include in the process, the fairer the process is going to be perceived, and process is just as important as the structure. It's not just about having a family meeting, it's the process of how we have the family meeting, and does it build trust and a sense of connection between the family members. So the more we exclude, the more we limit the depth of trust that we can have in the family. Next slide, please. So some of the benefits that families often see are by practicing conflict resolution and engaging in conflict resolution, we tend to resolve issues more fairly and methodically than families typically do. We have a greater sense of connection to each other and willingness to sacrifice for each other because we have a unified vision of where we're trying to go. So the greater the unity around the vision for where we're trying to go, the more we're willing to sacrifice for each other and think about the best interests of the whole rather than just our own individual interests. We can use family meetings to really build leadership skills. One of the families that actually there are a number of families in the membership right now that are looking at what are our leadership skills that we have on the team right now and what leadership skills do we need to develop in the family, for the board, for the business, to be effective owners and leaders of this family business for the next generation. So family meetings can be a place where we practice these conflict management skills. Some families have done finance for non-financial family members. There are a variety of different skill-building activities you can do. It communicates a sense that the family's working on things and gives a sense of stability to the employees that the family's working on things, and also allows the opportunity to talk about what do our values mean. We all are usually pretty good at putting 5 or 6 values up on the wall and saying this is what we believe, but the real transfer of values comes in the stories and living the values in life. And so the more we can share the stories of how we live the values and what we mean by the values with the next generation, the greater our ability to transfer these values to the next generation. We can use family meetings to preserve family tradition and history. There are a number of families that have kind of an orientation process for family members as they come into the family meetings for the first time. And one of the questions in that is always, what age do we start kids? And I think it largely ties to what are the children able to engage in relation to the family meeting, and that may be different for every family and every different age category. So a 14-year-old may be able to engage at a certain level, and a 21-year-old may be able to engage in the family meeting at a certain level, and being thoughtful about when and how to include people is important. Ultimately, it's about education of family members and building that family cohesion. Next slide, please. So content and structure. What we want to do with the content of a family meeting is take some of the issues that are non-day-to-day business related, that are really more related to the business of the family than the business of the business, and get them out of the day-to-day business discussion. So we want to gather ideas by polling family members about what are the important issues facing the family, where do we have alignment, where do we not have alignment within the family, and what do we need to be discussing to meet the challenges of the next 5 to 10 years. So our agenda and our content should be focused on what are the things that are going to make us successful moving forward. And in terms of how much of the past we should dredge up, you bring family history into the conversation when you want to educate the family about the history, the values, etc. But in terms of dealing with past hurts and pains, we like to say only focus on the past if it's preventing you from moving forward. So in general, resolving conflict is easier when we're focusing on a future goal that we can all buy into than trying to dredge up and correct something that's in the past. So trying to be future focused is usually more productive in the family meeting context. We want to have clear objectives for the outcomes we want for each session. So if we're going to talk about conflict and communication, that we know how long we're going to talk about it and what outcomes we want for that session. So we want to increase our listening skills, or we want to increase our capacity to have difficult conversations. So taking the subject matter that we want to engage in, and then trying to say, what's the outcome we want? So how would we know we were successful in executing this session at the end of the day? We want to make sure that we allow enough time, because one of the things that we often do is we overload the agenda, and it can create a lot of frustration in the family when we don't have enough time to adequately talk about the issues that we're facing as a family and a business. And one of the things that we often get off track with here is how much discussion time do we need on certain topics. So a little rule of thumb for you when you're looking at your agenda is to say, how important is this topic? How many people will need to talk, and for how long? So we have 10 people in the room, and each person has to talk for at least 3 minutes per person on this topic. Anything less than 30 minutes wouldn't be enough time to allow adequate discussion of that topic. So we want to make sure we have the right balance between serious topics and less serious topics, and enough time to engage in meaningful discussion about the topics at hand. Next slide, please. So some of the common family business topics, and there are obviously a lot longer list than this, but we thought we'd give you a first kind of go at that. And I should also say that anybody who wants the slides from this presentation afterwards can contact our office, and we'll get you the slides. But see, these are some common things that families talk about them. It's not an exhaustive list, but it's a basic list, reports of what's happened since the last meeting, specific reviews of the business. Oftentimes it'll include a tour of a certain business unit, or maybe introducing a new family business product, talking about the family constitution. Do we have a unified sense of family mission, vision, values? It may involve policy creation, ratifying of policies ranging from employment to dividend, etc. It can talk about conflictual family issues. It can talk about role definition. One of the families that I'm working with is building up to a conversation is, what is the path for next generation members to be board members, which is somewhat conflictual in the family. So thinking about that very carefully and structuring a discussion to deal with family conflicts. Leadership development. How do we develop leaders? And we may need to do something different to develop family leaders versus board leaders versus business leaders. What do we need to know as shareholders? How do we deal with liquidity issues? A lot of people, the classic family business is one that doesn't pay any dividends, and everybody's very paper-rich, cash-poor. And I think that can create resentment in the long term if we never talk about it and we never address the fact that the family has financial needs. So we have to have that conversation in a thoughtful way, and family meetings can provide a context to do that. How do we integrate in-laws into the conversation? How do we manage their orientation to the family, to the business? How do we hear their voice in the process? And ultimately, one of the goals of a family is to say, what businesses do we want to be in? And one of the critical things is educating family members and shareholders about what is the role of a shareholder versus what is the role of a manager. And that just because we own shares in the company doesn't mean that we get to make operational decisions about the day-to-day issues of the business. But we do get to make high-level strategic decisions about, what are our values, what businesses ultimately do we want to be in as a family at a high level. So the instance that I like to use as an example in this case is my dad died of lung cancer, so our family would not be in the cigarette business. So we don't want to be in a business like that. So another family in the membership has a belief that they won't do business in countries where it takes bribery in order to be successful as a business. So that's kind of a values discussion. What businesses do we want to be in? Setting some of the parameters within which the management operates. Risk level in terms of debt and acquisitions, those type of things can be things that at a very high level the family gets involved in some conversation about. Next slide, please. But ultimately, your family meeting should be some sort of combination between education and skill building, information sharing and decision making, and fun. We like to call this the family meeting tripod. And without the fun, the other tasks can feel kind of onerous and like drudgery, and we don't want the family meeting to be like that. We want the family meeting to be something fun, something that people look forward to, and you should think about the family meeting as something that's creating the glue and the relationships between the next generation that will propel them to family and business success moving forward. So I like to talk about it in the context of making an emotional deposit to the bank that you'll withdraw in tougher times. So it creates the context, the relationship for everybody to manage and deal with the issues that they're facing. Next slide, please. Leadership needs to call the family together, needs to build buy-in, so that may entail leadership beyond just the CEO or the parents. We may need to have family leaders that build family buy-in and leadership to keep the process alive. And having a sense of, am I a potential leader in this venue is important, because not everybody's going to have the right leadership skills to lead in the family meeting situation. It's important to have facilitation of the meeting to make sure that the meeting flows, that the agenda is followed, that there's a code of conduct, that people listen to each other. We want to, again, create a safe environment for everybody to be heard, and that when people step out of line, it gets acknowledged. You know, some families are very good at overlooking bullying behavior that happens and has happened for many years, but leadership of the family meeting and facilitation of the family meeting is critical to creating that safe environment. And we don't want that kind of bullying behavior to show up. And you know, another thing that I've seen in a lot of family meetings is kind of histrionic behavior, somebody getting really, really upset in a major way that distracts people from the conversation at hand. It's not that you shouldn't be able to express concern and being upset, but you know, histrionic behavior that is above and beyond just expressing your pain, your hurt, your opinion can be difficult. So some families have family members who facilitate. Some families use professional facilitators. I usually use the rule of thumb is how intense is the discussion, and can a family member adequately facilitate something that's extremely emotional and be objective in that process. And then we want to have resources and learning that are brought to the table in the context of these families. You know, so that may be case examples from other families, so inviting other families to make a case presentation about what they're doing in their families and business. Sharing articles with family members ahead of time and discussing articles. One of the families that I work with pulled a book, a business book, and then used some of the case examples in that business book to compare their company to the cases that are outlined in this business book. And then they had a discussion about, do we compare favorably or unfavorably? What are the risks of our business in relation to what we read in this book? You know, outside speakers, presenters, videos, all of those things can help add rich content to a family meeting. Next slide, please. So the frequency for family meetings is typically driven by the size and complexity of your family and business. So where you have 4 or 5 family members that all live geographically in the same area, you can get them in the room on a regular basis to talk about important family and business issues. But let's say you have 80 or 100 family members spread out across the world, the frequency of your family meetings might not be as high. And in those cases, you typically have to move to some sort of representative governance structure, such as a family council, where you elect a smaller group of people to represent the business of the family in between the family meetings which occur less frequently. So a family of 4 or 5 people may meet quarterly, depending on the intensity of the issues that they're discussing, whereas a family of 100 may meet once a year or every other year for some families, you know, in terms of the cost and expense. But one of the things that I should highlight about family meetings, because how do you pay for family meetings is often a topic of discussion, is you have to treat engaging the family as effective shareholders as investing it in an asset of the business. Because if you don't think of the family as an asset of the business and you don't invest in it, it's going to become a liability, and it's going to create conflict and all the family business stereotypical problems that we've all heard over the years. If we treat the family as an asset, we can create the family you don't need to protect the business from. So as your family grows in experience with family meetings and your family meetings become more complex, you may need to add more and more structure and organization to the family meetings. So you may have working committees that plan on managing the logistics of the meeting. What's the location? Where's the hotel? What business unit are we going to see? You may have a committee that deals with developing the next leader for the family meetings. You may have committees that take on specific topics. You know, if there's a hot button topic that somebody's complaining about, you might create a committee or a task force to look at that issue and try to address that issue and make a recommendation back to the family. You'll most assuredly want to have a code of conduct and meeting rules, because that, again, creates that safe environment. The agenda makes it clear that we're not in a family conversation. We're not being informal and letting the conversation go every which way, that we have clear topics that we need to talk about, and we've allotted enough time to engage in those issues. We may need to have a process for developing key issues to include in family meetings. And we want to make sure that we're addressing both the business and family concerns. But when we're talking about business issues, it's not about making day-to-day operational decisions. It's about what's the family's relationship to the business, and how does the family and the shareholder group support the growth and development of the business as an asset of the family. Next slide, please. So leading a family meeting. Not everybody in the family is prepared to lead a family meeting, and often we recommend that it should not be the leader of the business because, number one, they often don't have enough time, so the family meeting will always be a second priority to them. And oftentimes the skill sets needed to run the business are not the same skill sets that will help run a family meeting, so we need to think carefully about that. That our leader for our family meeting should be trusted broadly across the family. They should have a high sense of emotional intelligence and understanding both the surface level issues as well as the deeper issues that may be driving conversations, and the ability to stand up to people who may be perceived as powerful or are having all the power in a system. So they have to have the ability to interrupt or step in and manage the conversation at the appropriate time. And one of the, here's a little family meeting tip, is sometimes families like to get off topic, and so when a family gets off topic, you know, a good facilitator will say that's an important issue, we need to talk about it, but it's not on our agenda right now, so let's put that in the parking lot. We'll come back to the parking lot at another time and make sure that we address this issue, but right now this is the issue at hand that's on our agenda, so we're going to stick to that. So having the ability to step in and interrupt is important. You may need somebody who has strong organizational skills, somebody who can handle the details of, okay, so what kind of coffee do we want, what kind of meals do we need to be thinking about, what's the AV requirements, dealing with the hotel, how many rooms do we need. There are a lot of important details that need to be handled in order to create a good environment for family to select the right venue for the conversations that we're going to have, and one that will allow us to have fun as well. So somebody with organization and meeting planning skills is critical as well. And somebody who can work with family members around the family meetings. You may have somebody who's a set leader, or that individual may rotate, but they'll have to deal with how do we fund this, the logistics, are we going to do on-site or off-site, who's responsible for what, and how do we engage in the family fun. Next slide, please. The chair needs to make sure that people can talk uninterrupted, that we can have productive conversations. Don't go off topic unless we all agree on that. We want to think about our decision-making process before we're actually having to make that decision. So the more we can think ahead about those things and say, for certain types of issues, we may need a simple majority, but for issues that may set the course for a long period of time, we may want a higher bar of voting around making a decision. Or our goal may be consensus, but we want to have a clear idea of what that is before we get into the discussion. The chair will participate only at a minimal level. This is where having co-facilitators can be helpful. So if one person needs to jump into a conversation and wants to express an opinion, another person can kind of take on the facilitation skills at the same time, so that person can engage in the conversation. Getting concrete and encouraging examples when people differ, you know, being concrete and giving examples takes it out of the ethereal emotional side of, you were a real jerk to me on Thursday is not very specific. But if we say, when we were at that sales meeting on Thursday and you did X, Y, or Z, it was really difficult for me and it hurt me. Giving those examples help when we're having differences of opinion on important issues. We want to make sure everybody has a chance to talk and help everybody see the boundary between both the family and business issues. Next slide. At the end of the day, we want to make sure that everybody respects each other's opinions, that demonstration of that respect happens in every family meeting. We need to know when to interfere and not to as leaders of family meetings. And we want to have a basic understanding of everybody's goals and be open to the conversation, even when people are going to disagree with us. I think that's critical. Be tolerant of those differences. And in general, the more generosity we can show with each other, the more trust we will be building. If we're cutting off conversations and not allowing enough space for conversation, that sense of secrecy can destroy trust. Next slide, please. But at the end of the day, some of the foundation questions we can engage in from a family meetings perspective is, why are we in business together? Why do we want to stay together as a family? I like to say that when you start a business, you get to choose who your business partners are. In a family business, you inherit your business partners. So each generation has to make a decision about, why do we want to be in business together? What makes us greater together than separating us into different family branches or just taking our money and running? What do we get about being a family business together that we couldn't get otherwise? And if we can ultimately answer the question of, under what conditions we would sell, we then know the answer to why we're in business together. And if we can choose to make the family the unit of economic enterprise and create a healthy family, we can choose to enter and exit businesses as we see fit. So that is it for my part of the presentation. I'm now delighted to hand the reins over to Joni Jones and Sarah Richmond from Dawn Food Products. Dawn has been a member for probably 10+ years and has embarked on a process over the past 5 to 7 years of really transforming their family meetings, and I think you'll enjoy the story that Sarah and Joni will share with us. So, Sarah and Joni, I'm going to hand it off to you.
Okay, thanks. First of all, thanks for having us. It didn't really occur to me that we would be quote-unquote authorities on family meetings, so I really stopped to think about some of the first ones that were eons ago that, as Andrew's one slide showed, we very much baby stepped into the whole family meeting process, and we'll give you some history on that in a bit. But I had to laugh as Andrew's going through this, talking about families, to get off topic, because Andrew helped us moderate and run the business portion of our family meetings, and I had to laugh to myself because I'm sure he was thinking of us when he wrote that slide. Anyway, I'd like to give you a little bit of background. I'm a third-generation family member of the Jones family who operates Dawn Food Products. And Joni is married to my cousin Ben from obviously a different tree branch. I had worked at Dawn Foods for 10 years from 1993 to 2003, left for a while, and then came back after having kids, and I'm working there part-time. Joni has been very involved with our family meetings since she's married Ben as a participant, and very recently she's been helping organize and lead them. So she has a lot of good insight, and especially from an in-law insight. I think it's a really nice, refreshing perspective to have. So she brings a wealth of that with her as well. Oh, next slide. Sorry, Ryan. I'm sitting here clicking my computer. To give you a little feedback on Dawn Food Products, we started in 1920 as the Dawn Donut Company, and it was originally a mix manufacturer, and a lot of local bakeries wanted to make their donuts taste like the donuts that this shop did. So when they started selling more mixed than donuts, they actually changed from a bakery to a mixed manufacturing facility, and that's how that original company evolved. Next slide. My grandfather, who is our G1 in the Jones family, actually joined the company in 1935. So the original company was actually not the Joneses. My grandfather joined in 1935. He was a numbers guy and worked as an accountant and a purchasing agent. Then when one of the two owners passed away, gave his stock or sold his stock to the surviving owner, and then he passed away, his widow offered my grandfather the opportunity to purchase the stock in 1949, and then he obtained the total ownership in 1956. So that's a picture of our grandpa there. He unfortunately passed away, I want to say it was about 1982. Next slide. So here is these three gentlemen you see here are the sons of Grandpa Jones. The gentleman in the middle is my father, Steve. The gentleman on the left, Miles, is Joni's father-in-law. And our uncle, Ron Jones, on the far right, was really at the helm of Dawn when my grandfather died. So although he is G2, in many ways he ran and operated the business much like a G1, but they ran it in a siblings consortium, if you will. So it was really the three brothers that led the company. Ron he's now our co-chair or chairman of the board. He started in 1957, right about the time my grandfather bought it. In fact, my grandpa went to Ron and said, hey, I have an opportunity to buy this business. Ron was then 19 years old at Michigan State University, and he said, I don't really want to buy this and run it unless you're going to do it with me. So at 19, Ron kind of knew the fate of his future and welcomed it. I mean, it was something he wanted, but that's a kind of a young age to know what you're going to be doing. Then my uncle Mike, nicknamed for Miles, he's our current co-chairman of the board, joined in '67, and he in the past has been involved in a lot of formulation and R&D and quality assurance products, and now he serves as co-chairman. My father, Steve, joined in 1968 and was in charge of advertising, PR, marketing, that type of thing, and he passed away in 1995, so it's just Miles and Ron who are involved in the business currently. Next slide, please. This gives you all of G3 who is currently employed at Dawn Food Products. Carrie Jones-Barber, there in the one picture, is our current CEO. She is Ron Jones's daughter. And then Joni's husband is Ben, down there in the corner. He joined in 2007. His two older brothers, Aaron and Sam, are also employed at Dawn. And I am employed at Dawn part-time. I am back at the company now, running the foundation and doing a host of other small things for the company. Next slide, please. This gives you a little visual of how many people are in the family and how many in-laws there are and who does what. So in Generation 1, my grandfather passed away some time ago in 1982, but his widow, my Grandma Jones, who you see in the picture there with Joni's husband, Ben, that's her at our family meeting 2 years ago in Chicago. She'll be 97 this year. She does not obviously have any involvement in the company, but certainly is a big foundation behind it. In G2, there were a total of 4 children. My dad and his 2 brothers had a sister, and she and my father are deceased, so there's 2 involved in the company right now and currently 2 in-laws. In Generation 3, where Joni and I are, there are 10 of us in total. My cousin Connie, Ron's daughter, passed away some time ago. 5 of us are at Dawn, and there are 7 in-laws. And in Generation 4, there are 17 children currently. None of them obviously are employed, but we're prepping them for any future that they're going to be ready for. They are between the ages of 3 and 15. I happen to have the oldest and the youngest. Next slide, please. Here's a quick picture of all the G4. We are missing 1 child from that picture who wasn't able to make it, but that is all of G4 from 2 years ago. And that's we're going to do a plant tour in Manteno, Illinois. Next picture, or next slide. So now this, to give you a little idea of how Dawn is held, because it's kind of unique in many ways. Obviously at the top there is our family. On the far left is a 1973 trust that was capped at a certain amount of money that was put in for the benefit of Ron, Steve, my Uncle Mike, and Janet. That has since been monetized and basically loaned back to Dawn Food Products. They are in turn paying that loan back with interest to those 4 people or their heirs. The 1984 Generation Skipping Trust actually holds the ownership of Dawn Food Products. So none of our family members, including our co-chairman, no one actually has stock that he or she owns personally. It's all held in this 1984 Generation Skipping Trust. Currently, the managing general partner of Dawn Investment Company is my uncle, Ron Jones. He votes the dividend and board members, and we're actually in the current process of changing that for a whole bunch of reasons, but we'll be changing the voting structure of that investment company. The board of directors then reports to the investment company and the CEO, and then we have a Dawn leadership team that is what I call the heads of state. They report obviously to the CEO, up to the board of directors. About 5-6 years ago, we created a family steering committee, a very formal family steering committee. That is our communication arm between the family and the business. So that gives you an idea of our governance and our setup on our board of directors right now, because this is something kind of interesting to note. We currently have 5 family members and 1 outside director, but he's been with us since the early 80s. So we're in the process, as Andrew knows all too well, of coming up with what we want from any outside directors and how we're going to go about doing that. So that's coming up soon too. Excuse me, next slide. So we started having family meetings, and again, we tiptoed into this probably in the early 2000s. And these were meetings that if you were employed, if you were a Jones family member and you were employed at Dawn Food Products, you went to the family meeting with your spouse. And they figured, you know, your spouse hears about what you do day in and day out, and so much of what you do at work affects your home life, so that person needed to be there as well. Then we kind of realized much later on we needed to develop some kind of family protocol, and that was touching on things like if you want to work in the family company, what kind of education or experiences did we want you to have outside of Dawn? What were some of those requirements going to be? And then that kind of fizzled out. No one ever really had the time or attention to pay to it, or just didn't recognize at that time really how important that was. And then in about 2009, we hired an outside consultant, and she worked with us, and we developed a team that, whether we knew it or not, was going to become our family steering committee, and really started to hammer out details, and our family protocol became a family constitution. And we had, I will say that probably what triggered this was some internal conflict between the CEO and the chairman and some other things, and we needed to pull an outside consultant in to help us through some of that. And as a result, we came up with the Family Steering Committee and much more formal family meetings, because if you go back, you don't have to, Ryan, but if you go back a few slides, you saw that there was a 1984 Generation Skipping Trust. Currently, that holds the ownership of Dawn Food Products, and dividends that are paid out from the company go to Generation 3. All dividends currently are paid to Generation 3, and I will tell you, we're not independently wealthy off these dividends. This is just a nice little payment that, while it is nice, it is certainly not what some families are getting, I'm quite certain, but it was really raised the bar when we were going through the Family Steering Committee that, you know what, ownership isn't just those people who work at Dawn Food Products. That's management. We work there. We're hands-on. Some of us are involved in high-level decisions. Some of us aren't. Some of us are on the board. Some of us who work there are not. But really, the beneficiaries of what Dawn Food Products does is everybody in that 1984 trust. So that's all of Generation 3. And when we really kind of, peeled the onions off our eyes and thought about that, we decided our family meetings needed to be for the benefit of every single beneficiary, whether they were involved in a family meeting or not, because quite frankly, there's a financial implication that happens to each one of those people based on the performance of the company. So they are and are now getting updates on the family business quite frequently. We're getting much better and open in our communication. Some of G3 actually really wanted to know this information and wants to know how the company is impacting their said dividend. Some people truly just don't care. But there was a mix in between, and so we decided to really formalize ourselves, and we started doing that in 2009 with the help of that outside consultant. So that's really how we went from just those who work at Dawn and their spouses to all of Generation 3 and their spouses. Next slide. So what we do with our family meetings, and Joni can get into this some more, we meet once a year as per our family constitution. Every other year we bring Generation 4 with us, and we try to expose them to facets of the business, whether that's a Dawn manufacturing plant or distribution center, or whether that's maybe one of our suppliers or somebody that we do business with, so they can see not just Dawn, but the impact that Dawn has or the impact other companies have on us. And Joni, why don't you take it here? You can talk about some of the details of the planning and all that goes into this. She's done she did last year's planning, and she's doing this year's planning as well.
Okay. The date selection is always decided at the year before, either the beginning or ending, whenever the day that we have our meeting. The location, we try to figure out where we have or have not yet been. You know, what it is we're looking to as far as our locations go. Like this next year, we're going to be going to New York City and visit one of our distribution centers out there. Excuse me. And the travel and hotel is something that I like to take care of myself. It's something I enjoy doing. We do have a corporate travel agent, but selfishly, I like to do it myself. So I do all the research and investigation on the areas and negotiations with the hotels. And, you know, if we have kids coming, we always have to make sure that those families have adjoining rooms, and a lot of intricate little things there. The meeting agenda, I usually get with a couple of the people that work for the couple of family members that work for Dawn, and we set up an agenda because, let's face it, I don't know what they need to discuss, and as far as the business aspect goes, I just like to talk about all the fun stuff. And then the kids' activities, we always try and set up something that is pertinent to the children. When we went to Chicago, they got to go to the Field Museum, and then they came back and gave us a report of the things that they saw, the things that they liked, the things that they did. And that's what goes into the planning of our family meetings.
Just to add to the location selection, Dawn Food Products has about, I don't know, 25 different areas across the United States, different physical locations. We've been lucky that in many of them, Seattle, Denver, Louisville, even the Chicago area, there's always been a manufacturing facility and a distribution center right near each other or within the same geographical region, so that we've been able to do a family site visit to each of those locations. And as you've heard, sometimes we have kids with us, sometimes we don't. We do try to make a pertinent visit to a site location if we can. 2 years ago when we were in Chicago, we actually went to one of our chocolate suppliers. And that was really interesting because we and all of the kids learned about where cocoa is grown, how it's harvested, how it's treated, and then of course we got to taste different samplings of, you know, milk chocolate up to like 80-90% cocoa chocolate, which was amazing.
I didn't get invited to that part of the meeting.
That was not the business. So you didn't need to moderate that part for us, Andrew.
I will moderate that anytime, any day.
I'm sure you will, and you're welcome to. So, and all this, Joni went over this and makes it sound like so easy, but there is a ton of work that goes on the back end of this. One of the hardest parts that we have now really smoothed into, at the end of every business meeting, like she mentioned, we choose the date for next year's meeting. And believe it or not, that was quite the hassle at first, but now everybody's come to expect that will happen around the same time each year, so we're getting much better at that. And then we work to location next. Joni graciously has handled all of the hotel details, but the flight arrangements and things like that, each family calls into our corporate travel agency and then makes their own family's reservations with the travel agent there, so that's been really helpful. And then the meeting agenda, one of the things that we do, and I think we learned, again, trial and error, but one of the things we've learned that's so important is to solicit the family well in advance to say, hey, we're coming up to our family meeting. What do you want to see on the agenda? Is there anything you would like discussed? Do you want to know about Dawn's mergers and acquisitions? Do you want to know why such and such a plant was closed? Do you have an interest in the financials? Do you have an interest in this? So we're giving opportunity to the family to say, hey, yes, I would like to know about X, Y, and Z. So the meeting agenda isn't just regurgitating of Dawn information to the family, but it's about the family. You know, is there a problem or an issue or something you'd like to raise about the family or about your own life or what have you? So it becomes a sounding board for everybody. Next slide. Okay, oh, and I hope you guys can read this. There you go. Thank you so much. We put a couple examples up of different agendas that we had from some of the last family meetings. I won't walk you through all of these, but a lot of them are heavy on Dawn information because one of the goals of having the family meeting is for those of us who aren't there day to day and don't work there or really don't have a big emotional connection to the company is to say, hey, here's what's going on in the company and here's how it impacts you as a beneficiary of that 84 trust. And telling everybody what's been going on, you know, since the last family meeting with the company. We also talk about what's been going on in our own lives and what is it that we are looking to get out of the family meeting. And so we go through a lot of that and a lot of our family constitution and different things like that. Next slide. This is another agenda. This was last year's agenda. It was just the adults and we were in Seattle. And one of the things Andrew mentioned, Andrew has been at quite a few of our last several family meetings. And while we probably do have some decently qualified family members who can moderate and kind of see through the waters, it's really, really nice to have a neutral outside party.
Absolutely.
Who's very educated, has a ton of experience in family meetings and family businesses, that if the situation or the conversation gets a little dicey or uncomfortable, can really stop people and say, hey, you know, kind of see you through the muddy waters. And we definitely have some G2 people who would not take us at our word or what we are saying because we probably don't have the experiences that they want us to have, and they know that Andrew does. So when Andrew jumps in and helps moderate, it really calms down any waters. We honestly haven't had anything too crazy at all, but it is very, very helpful to have a neutral outside party that everyone has faith and confidence in to jump in when you need to, and bring information for other best practices from other families. So when we get to an area where we're not in agreement, Andrew can come in and say, well, you know, it's been my experience that this, this, and this. That's been very, very insightful and very helpful.
Sir,
we do have assigned a devil's advocate and a timekeeper, somebody to take note. And I will say our family can tend to get way off track, and we're probably our own worst enemy.
Can you say a little bit about the devil's advocate role? Yeah,
the devil's advocate is essentially it's somebody whose job it is to see the other side of the coin on any discussion. I'll give you an example. Let's say there's a discussion on how many years or if we want anyone from Generation 4 to work outside the company before he or she was going to apply for a job at Dawn. Well, the devil's advocate job would be to present the opposing view of the one being commonly discussed at the table. So that just keeps us in line, makes sure that we're covering all sides of the bases and we're all thinking outside the box as well. Great. Not always easy. Generally, we work through lunch. We try and get this all done in one day. And when the kids are with us, our agenda is generally much lighter. We're working on that. It's not as intense or not, yeah, it's an ongoing process. And as the kids get older, that may be easier to do, but right now it's a bit of a challenge. And the kids are all with caretakers or babysitters off-site doing something fun, and then they join us at the end of the meeting. Okay, next slide. Okay, this is just a little bit about what we found that worked and what we changed over the years. And this is like seriously over the last 10 to 13 years. We do always like to visit either a Dawn facility or somebody who works as a partner with Dawn, not only just for our own benefit, but especially if we have the kids with us, it really helps them to see outside of Dawn. We always have a family fun event, and last year we changed that, and this is one of the things we changed. We moved our we used to do site visits, fun thing, business meeting. And so if there was ever any anxiety or things left unsaid or, hey, I really wish I knew more, then we left and flew home after our business meeting. So we moved our business meeting. We usually fly in wherever on Wednesday. We hold our business meeting on Thursday. And if the kids are with us, they're off doing something fun. Then Friday we do site visits, whether that's Dawn or vendors or suppliers. And then Saturday we all do something fun together, whether that's going to an aquarium, going to a baseball game, touring a facility, or doing something. We do our fun thing at the end, so everybody generally leaves on a high positive note.
It made a huge, huge difference.
It did. It did. Very noticeably. Yeah, that was one of the smartest moves we've made, to be honest with you.
Yes, it was.
One of the things we've really tried to do, and we're only getting somewhat better at this, is decreasing the heavy content or the business portion of the meeting when the kids are with us. There's just way too many distractions, and you got to keep that meeting really light. Like I mentioned before, we solicit the family for agenda items well in advance of the meeting, so we're addressing anybody's concerns. I will say I think one of the biggest things that we're getting out of the family meetings is just more of an emotional tie to each other, which I think is really, really important. We're geographically spread anywhere from New York to California and Florida. So it's really good, especially to get the G4 cousins together who aren't around each other all the time, and let them play together and have fun together and just know that, hey, this is my relative and he or she's going to have my back. And just learning to communicate as a family. Unfortunately, anytime our family gets together, a lot of conversations always tend to revolve back around the business, but somehow when we're together this way and in this setting, we have lots of conversations about other things simply because we're together for such a long period of time, and it's great.
Absolutely.
So I would say that's one of the biggest bonuses out of that.
Absolutely, the unscripted conversations.
Next slide, please. Oh, I guess that was it. I didn't realize. At this point, I certainly welcome, Joni and I will be glad to take any questions, comments. That's kind of the high 360-degree or 10,000-foot view. So if you'd like any more details, I'd certainly
we do have a couple questions that came in. One was, does the company cover all the costs for family members to travel to the locations you go to for the family meetings?
Yes, we do, and that kind of took a while to come around to. There was some G2 pushback on that because it is kind of huge, especially when you bring the kids in. Generally, people are flying in. We pay for flights, hotels, meals, the cost of a nanny or caretaker babysitter person that you bring. And, we consider it a business travel expense, and we have those who don't work at Dawn fill out a business travel expense form, including their mileage to and from the airport, parking at the airport, everything. That took a while to kind of come around to that, but we realized, and I think Andrew helped us through that as well, this is an investment in the family so that the family is not a haphazard issue with the business. And it really is. It really makes a lot of sense. And when that view is taken, and when you look at the expense related to the cost of the family meetings versus what you get out of it, it starts to make more sense. And we carry the budget in our, we have a family steering committee budget through Dawn Food Products that houses the budget for the family meeting, attending seminars, different educational things like that. So yeah, we do. We pay for it all. I was surprised too.
Another question that came in was, you mentioned that there are some people who really kind of don't have an interest, and the question was, how do you seek to communicate, engage with, have any of them kind of come around and started attending, or how do you deal with those folks?
Well, and I don't have the golden answer there, and if anybody does, please let me know. We definitely have some in-laws and family members that are not as, there's not the emotional connection to the business, and I get that. So far, everybody who can come to the family meetings comes. We don't make it mandatory, but we do say that if you are, and we just voted on this actually as a result of our last meeting, if you are going to come to the family meeting, it will be, if Dawn's going to pay for you to fly in, stay in the hotel, whatever, it will be mandatory that once you're there, that you participate in the site visits, the business meeting, and the family fun event. If you want to come and not participate in those things, we're not going to pay for it because you're not adding any value to the meeting and the family time, but you just want to come and have dinner on occasion. Well, that's not going to happen. So far, although we have some folks that are just not as turned on by the meetings, they do come. And one of the big things that we're aware of is, especially at the business portions during conversation, is engaging them and saying, so, so-and-so, so what do you think about this? And leaving it very open-ended and kind of pulling them in. And I know that for some, it's kind of seen as, oh, this big hassle, and why do I have to go to your family's meeting? And now I've got to arrange daycare for the kids and this and this and that. And we may or may not change that person's point of view over time, but you constantly take the high road. You keep including, you keep including, you keep including, and you ask questions and ask for their thoughts and opinions, whether or not you're going to like them, and just pray to God that one day the attitude or the thought about the family meeting will switch.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's a huge asset for all the children, all the G4, regardless of if their parents have a huge interest or not. The fact that they're actually making the effort to come and they bring their children, the kids are, able to see what's going on and, possibly have a future interest, which is, that's a good thing. It's their,
mm-hmm.
it's theirs. Their legacy.
Another question which kind of centers around communication is, how do you make sure that all voices are heard, and then if you get into conflict, how do you deal with conflicts within the context of the meeting?
And the business meetings, you mean?
Yeah.
Can you read the first part of the question again?
How do you make sure that all voices are heard in the context of the family meeting?
Well, obviously we use the agenda to guide us as far as subject matter goes. If there's items that we need to vote on, this last time there were changes to our amendments we wanted to make to our family constitution. Everybody gets a vote. So if there's any discussion to be had ahead of time, questions, concerns, and quite often you can read somebody's body language or their facial expression, and you may say, okay, Joni, how are you feeling about this? What are your thoughts? And you can solicit that ahead of time. We haven't. I will be thankfully we have not hit any super major conflict. The only discussion I can think of that was a little, it wasn't even heated, but there was general disagreement, was how many years we wanted a G4 child to work outside of Dawn, potentially after college graduation or high school graduation, before they worked in the company. But one of the things that we all agreed on, and is in our family constitution, is the majority vote sets the protocol, and we agreed to disagree. And some of us may, feverishly disagree with what the vote was, but we did all agree and have said we will go with what the vote is if the majority votes that way, even though I disagree. And so far, that's generally worked. But again, I would say we haven't had any super major issues yet, so thankfully.
Would you recommend, this is another question, would you recommend non-shareholder family members be included in the family meetings and the family fun event?
I'd say absolutely, because if you look at it as a family first, you're building that bond and, stretching that family unit and that family cohesion. So sure, why wouldn't you do that? And they may or may not find the business portion interesting, and you never know. Maybe even though it's a non-shareholding person, but maybe there's some interest or value at working in the family company that could benefit the company and that individual.
Maybe you could talk a little bit, because originally you just had the people working for the business and their spouses. Can you talk about how things changed between the, when you started adding?
We did. Oh, sorry. Yeah, it was kind of funny because originally we thought all we were doing was talking about business, and which, kind of was. So why would it matter to anybody else? Well, quite honestly, shame on us. It was a very narrow view of what the reality and the actual state of ownership of the company was. And, I just honestly don't think it ever occurred to anyone that, hey, you know what? This company is really benefiting lots of other people who don't work here or maybe have no interest in ever working here. But in all fairness to them, it is their right to know legally and ethically. It is their right to know what's going on in this company because they have a direct benefit from it. And when we kind of heard that and started seeing that, and there were some people who didn't work at the company who wanted to know more, even though they never really wanted to work there, but they were like, hey, I kind of like to know what's going on. It really kind of just opened our eyes, and we're like, geez, shame on us, and we just kind of changed it.
Gotcha. Another question that came up was, apart from taking kids on site visits, do you have a formal structure for giving the kids additional education, or is there anything beyond just those site visits?
Oh, funny you should ask. That is, that's kind of, and I won't say a thorn in my side right now, but that we have a mentoring committee that has just started, literally.
It's something we're working on. It's brand new.
Yeah. We have solicited information from lots of other families because there's a lot of families. I would tell you to call Andrew and have him get you in touch with some of these other families that have very formal plans for their younger generations and activities, and here's what they do. We're not quite that formal yet. We're working on that. A lot of our kids are not of the age, where they would do something real super intense educational, but we've talked about, putting them in teams, having them create, gizmo A, B, or C, and then selling that or presenting that to us. And we'll slowly evolve that, but we don't have anything formal at this point now. We're working on it because we see that it's coming up, and within the next few years, the vast majority of our kids will be in middle school. So it'll be a great time to have something ready to go.
Mm-hmm. So another interesting question that came up is, who is everybody that votes? Does that include bloodline, family members, spouses, younger generation?
Right now, it's everybody who's at the business portion of the family meeting, which is all the beneficiaries and spouses, if you have one. And so it's my grandmother, my aunts and uncles, all of my cousins, and their spouses. G4 is not at the business portion of the family meeting, and I believe, although I don't have it sitting in front of me, according to our family constitution, I don't think they get to vote until they've been through a mentoring program, which as of yet is not formalized until they're about the age of 21 anyway.
Gotcha. Great. Well, we went a little bit over time, but we had a lot of really great questions that came in. If anybody has follow-up questions or they want to go deeper into a question that didn't get answered here, feel free to reach out to the Family Business Center at 312-915-6490. And if you'd like a copy of the slides, please let us know. You should get a follow-up evaluation. We'd love to get your feedback on this webinar, what worked, what didn't, and what you'd love to see included in future webinars as well. So thank you all. Thank you to Joni and Sarah for your participation and for sharing so openly about your family and your business. And we look forward to seeing everybody at the Illinois Family Business of the Year Awards, November 21st, at the Four Seasons Hotel. For more information on that, you can go to our website, www.luc.edu/FBC. Thanks very much. Have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.